finally happening.
Ocean blue, I came home for you.
Welcome to the Move, Breathe, Heal podcast and YouTube channel space. Yay! My name is Ashley Gonzalez. I will be your host, your guide in this Move, Breathe, Heal space. It's finally happening. This is something that has been about 2 to 3 years in the works. That quite honestly has just sat on the back burner for far too long, to not only be able to have a space to share more of my story, so that way you guys can get to know me as your teacher, your guide, your practitioner, what I do, the many things that I do, to be able to share some of these tools with you in a more accessible way. Some of these tools that have really transformed and changed my own life. So before we dive into what this is, what I do, all of you can kind of get to know who I am as a person, get to know your practitioner in breathwork and somatics, get to know your teacher in human design and astrology. I'm kind of using this as an opportunity for you all to get to know who I am before we dive into what I do. You know, what led me here to this point of doing all the things that I do, and with breathwork, somatics, human design, and astrology. So if you are on a journey yourself of healing, of self-expansion, of transformation, or even just self-discovery, you're in the right place. Welcome. To get to know what brought me here to this space right here in 2025, we'll have to journey into the past a little bit, or a lot, without giving you my entire childhood life story, because we'd be here for like 48 hours. And I'm sure there will be plenty of future episodes where I can touch on some things while also respecting, you know, not everyone's story is my story, and respecting people's privacy in that. I wanted to share a few really pivotal moments in my own childhood that led me here, that led me to Move, Breathe, Heal. And obviously those moments made me who I am today. So let's get to know me. I grew up in a household where chaos and unpredictability, instability was pretty much the norm. Disclaimer, I love my parents. I still have a relationship with both of them. Through my childhood, my parents, for various reasons, were not able to provide stability in the way that I needed at the time. I found myself in very adult responsibilities at a very young age. My parents were divorced by the time I was 2 years old. My mom remained a single mom, still is a single mom. I was kind of placed into very adult responsibilities at a very young age. In today's standards, my parents were pretty young when they had me, right around the 21, 22 age range, both of them. So growing up the way that I did, although it was painful, what it also did was it sparked a really strong awareness within me and a really strong determination within me from really early on to break free from generational cycles and to kind of be the alchemist of my family, to learn how to alchemize and transform darkness into healing, growth, and evolution. You know, I have learned in my 30 years of life, I'm 30 for those who want to know that, in my 30 years on this earth, that even in my darkest moments, there's still this spark of resilience that I can choose to lean into in those really dark moments, in those hard times, and allow it to guide me into a better path. That's what alchemy is to me, is taking those really dark and sometimes ugly roots and transforming it into something good and useful. So this journey of transformation really led me to embracing, breathwork and somatics, all the tools that are the foundation of Move, Breathe, Heal today. I've had a lot of turning points in my life and a lot of, really high highs and a lot of really low lows. One of the most pivotal moments in my journey was meeting my now husband when I was a teenager. My husband, Gage, and I have been together since we were 15 years old. So meeting him and entering his family was one of those pivotal moments of showing me what could be possible for me. Being welcomed into his family with open arms. Kind of gave me one of my first real glimpses into what safety, what stability, what authentic self-expression. I had this awareness in me that something wasn't right, or a lot of things weren't right. And I knew what I didn't want. There was, that happens with so many of us who grow up in a lot of chaos and instability. We know what we don't want, but it's kind of hard to know what we actually do want because we've never felt it. We've never experienced it. We don't know what it's like. You can look around at your environment when you're a kid and you can go, I never want to repeat this cycle, or I know that I don't want this. I know that doesn't feel good. And it kind of gets imprinted into us. But meeting my husband at such a young age, obviously we were not married at 15. We were married at 21, but experiencing warmth and experiencing that firsthand when I had never really experienced it in that way before, it really helped me realize what I did want and what my future home could look like. Right around that same time, I started going to therapy. I think I was about 16 years old when I started my first journey with therapy. Another huge step in deepening my self-awareness. I remember learning about a lot of mindfulness and transforming victimhood into empowerment during those early years of therapy, which was huge in giving me the ability to actually follow through with breaking some of these generational cycles and traumas and patterns. Seeing and experiencing firsthand that loving relationships can last, and that homes could be sanctuaries almost. They could be sanctuaries of peace. A home could be peaceful, and that there could be all of these really loud and expressive personalities, and all of them could come together and love each other unconditionally and authentically express themselves and accept each other and communicate in a way that I had never seen or experienced before. So between that and entering therapy right around the same time, this really was where my journey to Move, Breathe, Heal began. My husband and I make it through high school, and I enter another major turning point in my life. And this turning point was my first experience with deep grief and loss. Like I said earlier, my parents divorced when I was very young, and my dad actually didn't live in the same town as my mom and I. And so with my mom being a single mom, I spent a lot of my days with my maternal grandmother, or my gram, as my family called her. She's our gram. Gram was one of the most important people in my life growing up. She and I were incredibly close, and my gram loved her grandkids, as most grandmas do. But my gram had 7 kids, and so we had this huge family of grandkids and cousins and extended family that, how do I word this? Although it was very highly dysfunctional, my gram really made up for a lot of things in her grandkids. And because I spent so much time with her, probably even more than some of the other grandkids, due to my mom's work schedule. I mean, when I was young, she used to have 2 or 3 jobs at a time. So I was with my grandma a lot. And she was one of the constants for me. So the same month that I graduated high school, in 2013, my family unfortunately found out that she was diagnosed with stage 4 multiple myeloma cancer. After her diagnosis, she did fight for a little bit over a year. I was actually off to college at this time with my then boyfriend, now husband, and we didn't live super close. My grandma lived in southern Utah, and Gage and I were living in Denver, Colorado at the time for college. That was really, really hard. Losing her really changed everything. One of the things that isn't talked about so much when it comes to grief and loss is all of the secondary losses that happen too, and the family dynamics that shift. Not only was I navigating my own grief and loss, but my entire family and extended family dynamics completely changed after that too. My grandma was kind of the glue that held everyone together and that kept everyone together. And even though there was a lot of dysfunction going on with the whole entire family, she was the glue that helped keep it together. And when she passed, the glue melted and everything fell apart. I remember Gage and I moving back to Utah when we were 20, and I jumped right into school after we moved. She passed in June. Gage and I got engaged in July, and then we moved. And then I started trade school. I went to esthetician school, all back to back to back. And I remember when I was about 21, after finishing esthetician school, I remember falling into a really deep depression. And I was in therapy at the time, and at the time I had also, talked to my doctor and gotten on medication, but those were really, 8 to 10 years ago, the only tools that were being talked about when it came to mental health was therapy and medication. And while those tools did help me survive at the time and may have helped me function getting back into a 9-to-5 job, they may have helped me keep myself in survival mode to get through each day. Those tools had a time and place while I started my first business as an esthetician, while I went back to a 9-to-5 job, while building that business, while planning my wedding after esthetician school. And while those tools were useful at that time, I later realized that those tools were really just helping me to survive and to cope without giving me a proper understanding of what true trauma healing and support really looks like. It wasn't really until my mid to late 20s when more awareness came into that, which leads me to my next pivotal moment in my journey to move, breathe, heal. And this was when I was about 26. You know, for the previous 5 to 6 years, I had built a career as an esthetician and a lash artist, and I really did enjoy that at the time. I was in that space. I really did enjoy it. I loved the one-on-one time that I would get with my lash clients, and I started it off by traveling to people's homes and doing eyelash extensions in people's homes. And then, you know, when Gage and I moved out of our 1-bedroom apartment into a 3-bedroom condo, I had, you know, a little lash office space where I would do facials and waxing and eyelash extensions. And then we eventually bought our first home, and shortly after that, I moved my lash room into a commercial space and started renting from an acne clinic, and had a room that was like mine. It was my room. And I had hustled so hard to get to that point. I remember feeling so excited and so proud when I moved into my own lash room. And I had poured so much of my time, so much of my energy into Ashley Chanel Beauty. For those of you who have been following me since then, you'll remember. But, you know, as what happened to many of us when 2020 hit and the world decided to shut down, I experienced something that I don't think I had really fully allowed myself before. That was silence. You know, when I had experienced that for the first time, and I experienced that stillness and that slowness after years and years of hustling, for the first time in years, I wasn't hustling and I was still, and I was forced to face my own thoughts and what was actually going on inside. I had gone into this whole health journey with endometriosis and ovarian cysts, and had decided leading up to that point to dive into a bunch of my own research, and had stopped all medications from entering my body at that point. And I felt like my baseline was totally okay and safe enough to do so at that point. But because of this, I had my true baseline awareness in 2020, and I was able to sit in that stillness, sit with my thoughts, and I was faced with some truths that really caught me off guard. And that truth was that I felt relieved. I felt relieved to have closed my business. Even if it was temporary, I felt like oh, thank God. And I didn't fully know why yet at that time. As much as I loved my clients, I mean, I looked forward to it every day, going to my office, and we used to joke around that my office was like the unofficial therapy room. It was unofficially protected by HIPAA, you know. We would make jokes about that between me and my clients. But stepping away and being still and being in that silence, I think so many of us experienced this, revealed how burned out I was and how much I hadn't processed, even from, you know, losing my gram when I was 19. There was so much going on in my nervous system and in my body that I didn't even understand yet. And stepping away really revealed to me how burned out I was. And I reopened. I came face to face with another really harsh truth, because I thought, I thought when I experienced that relief that it was temporary, but reopening made me face this truth that I had avoided by continuing to hustle, by continuing to stay busy. And that truth was that I didn't want to do this anymore. I didn't want to be an esthetician anymore. And at first, that realization was terrifying. I was not cool with that realization at first. I felt so ashamed. I felt embarrassed. I felt like, well, then what did you go to school for? What did you put all of this time, all this money, all this energy into this for? I just felt like I was letting everyone down by admitting that to not only to myself, but even just another person. I told myself I was too old to start over, which is hilarious looking back now that I'm 30. I'm like, let's start something new any day of the week, right? Like if I could go back and give that 26-year-old a hug, I just wish I could, because 26 is so young to be starting over in the grand scheme of things. And I will never forget this conversation. One of my colleagues at the acne clinic that I rented from, when I told her that I wanted to close and moving out and that I would no longer be renting there anymore, that room would be open. I will never forget this conversation, because this was such a pivotal moment that I needed so badly at the time. And she clearly knew that. I remember she looked me in the eye and said something along the lines of, how exciting is this that you get to start over? Like, this is such a gift. You get to explore, you get to be curious, you get to find out more about yourself. Like, I'm so excited for you. And I remember just kind of sitting there in that conversation and being like, what? Like, I'm not in trouble? You're not mad at me? I remember in that moment, she released so much shame for me in that simple conversation. And I don't know if she even will ever see this video or even remembers that conversation as well as I do, but I'll never forget that, because I was so ashamed and I was so scared, and she almost gave me permission to go run and to like honor that intuitive nudge. So after that day, I trusted my intuition. I closed my business with absolutely no plan for the future. I remember people asking me like, so what's next? So what's next? And it was hard to not have an answer for them and just to sit with my own I don't know, let alone give that I don't know to somebody else. I returned back to a 9-to-5. I sat with the I don't know for a while. This is really where the transition and the pivot into Move, Breathe, Heal starts. During that year, it was about a year of me working at that 9-to-5, I discovered this thing that I had never heard of before, and no one else really had heard of this at that time yet either, and that was human design. I had no idea why I was so drawn to it, and I honestly can't even remember exactly where I stumbled upon it. It wasn't that big yet. 2020 and 2021. It wasn't talked about nearly as much as it is today. And even today, it's still a minority in comparison to like astrology. But I digress. During that year, in that 9-to-5, I stumbled upon human design and I was instantly magnetized towards it. Like, the pull to it was undeniable. It felt like it was a force bigger than me. That's all I can say. It was bigger than me, and I felt like I needed to learn every single thing about it fast. And I did, and it clicked so quickly for me. It was almost like I already knew the information and I was just remembering it. It was so wild. It was all I could think about. It was all I could study. It was all I could learn. You know, I would go home from my 9-to-5 and I would read books. I would listen to every podcast or YouTube video I could. I spent hours and hours researching human design and reading every single book I could on it. Like, am I having a psychotic break? Do I need to go to the doctor? Like, what is going on? Because it felt so uncertain and so uncomfortable, but also so correct at the same time. I couldn't explain it. I remember telling Gage, like, hey, I'm gonna start doing this. And he was just kind of like, okay. Like, I think he thought it was a phase, and I probably did too at the time. But he was supportive and didn't understand what I was doing at all. I didn't understand it either. But I remember looking out at the universe, and after learning about my own human design, I'm a manifesting generator, and so I knew that human design was something that lit me up like nothing ever had before. It made me feel so alive and so energized. And I remember looking up at the sky one day and I was like, okay, God, angels, universe, I feel like I'm going crazy. So if you could give me a sign that I'm on the right path and like make it pretty obvious, that would be cool. And that same week that I did that, I had 3 different people bring up hey, have you ever heard of human design? And like I said, in 2021, it was not common knowledge. It wasn't talked about. I remember the 3rd person that asked me, I didn't have a business name. I didn't have prices. I didn't even know for sure if I was going to be doing this and like offering readings for people. I was just still deep dive hyperfixating on learning about the topic. And the 3rd person that asked me was like, hey, have you heard of human design? And I was like, funny you say that. I'm looking to start a business and doing it. And she was like, oh my gosh, I want to do a reading. Can you do one for me and my husband? I was like, yes. Had no idea how much I was going to charge her, but that was a time for a later. Okay, God is speaking like so loudly right now after I put that out there, that for this to be the 3rd person to bring it up to me in a week, I need to go with this. And so I said yes. I did a reading for her and her husband. And I remember leaving that and I had felt so lit up and energized in a way that I never had before. Even when I was lit up by my esthetician career, this was different. This felt like, holy shit, this is what you're supposed to be doing. And I still didn't understand why then, but I knew and I trusted from then on that, like, even if I didn't know exactly how I was going to make this into a business, I didn't know how all the puzzle pieces were going to fit, that this was one of the puzzle pieces and I needed to start now. And so I did. And not long after that, I actually discovered breathwork at the same time. And the very first breathwork class that I ever took was online. And honestly, with breathwork, like, I had no expectations around it. I didn't really know what it was either. I was just curious about it and decided, all right, I'm going to try it. So, I take my first breathwork class. It's online. I'm in my bedroom by myself. And in that breathwork session, something happened that I couldn't fully explain. But I had a vision of myself in an outdoor space guiding a group of people through breathwork. And this was in my very first breathwork experience. This is what I saw. And again, this was like my full body was saying, yes, you need to look into this too. You need to trust this. And even if nobody else understands, you need to go for it. So I followed that feeling, and not long after that, I signed up for my first breathwork training, and I actually signed up for yoga teacher training too at the same time. I quit my 9-to-5 job. which made absolute no financial sense, but I did it. And I was just like, this is what I need to do. And even if my most trusted people don't understand, this is what I need to do. And I kept practicing breath work. I went to that first breathwork training, and I still didn't really know where any of this was going to lead, but I continued to trust it. It was actually funny. When I entered yoga teacher training, I was dead set, determined, like, I'm gonna be a yoga teacher. And that clearly changed because I have yet to be a yoga teacher post-training. But what that training did was it helped me connect with my body in a more spiritual way. I grew up dancing. I danced from the time I was 5 until I was 18. And so, body movement was always a really important part of my childhood and my expression. But that was done in a lot more perfectionistic way. And yoga teacher training allowed me to connect with my body and to release my ego in a way that I hadn't experienced yet. For a long time, for the first couple years into this, people would ask me, what do you do? And I couldn't describe what I did. And this all kind of helped me get there and remember who I was outside of what I did, outside of the exterior labels. This is who I am on the inside. So all of these moments led to Gage and I moving to Arizona. We actually moved on Christmas Day, Christmas Day of 2021. It was not an expected move either. This was another one of those all right, we're magnetizing an opportunity and it feels good. It makes no logical sense to leave right now, but this is what we're doing. And we got up and left and moved to Arizona Christmas Day. I remember at that time, I felt on fire. I had never felt more magnetic. I had never felt more aligned. Felt like the most embodied and confident version of myself. The first 10 months in living in Arizona, I was genuinely the happiest I had ever experienced in my life. And I give this analogy to those who work with me, that just like the breath expands, at some point the breath has to contract, and then it expands again, and then it contracts again. And life does that as well. With every expansion comes a contraction and another opportunity to expand again. And unfortunately, in October of 2022, tragedy struck my family. Between October of 2022 and May of 2023, my family lost 3 family members in unexpected and very traumatic ways. Told myself I wasn't gonna cry, but grief and traumatic loss creates this deep well of love inside of us that has nowhere to go. And so if you see me or hear me tearing up, that's all that this is. The weight of consecutive grief. It's one thing to lose one family member, but when it comes back to back to back like that in such a short amount of time, I went from being this, most confident, happiest version of myself, and all of that consecutive grief just completely shattered me. Everything I had once relied on, human design, breath work, yoga, my business, my friendships, my new home, all of it felt different. When I first took breathwork training and the the breathwork classes that I had experienced, they were more intense. They were more fast-paced. Some know it as like holotropic or shamanic breathwork. But that faster-paced breathwork that I once loved, that once grounded me, that felt overwhelming and even triggering. Yoga, which had been my sanctuary, now even going to a yoga class felt like too much. Doing a yoga stretch at home felt like too much. Getting out of bed felt like too much. When you experience that much grief in such a short time, everything feels numb. Typical thing that we're taught in human design about do what lights you up if you're a generator or a manifesting generator, it no longer resonated, because grief is so numbing. It's so overwhelming to our nervous systems, and especially when all grief is traumatizing in my opinion, but this was so different than even my grandma. My grandma, we had time to say goodbye, and it was awful. It was hard, but we had this year with her where we could, I don't want to say prepare, because nothing prepares you for someone you love passing away, but we just had more time, and with these other family members, we just didn't have that. They were sudden, they were traumatizing. And this was the time when astrology kind of started to enter the chat. I started looking at astrology and human design both in a whole new way, with a completely different lens. This might sound out there to some of you, but to some of you who haven't experienced a deep loss, but after my loved ones passed, I was able to get my hands on some of their birth records. And their astrology charts and their human design charts then became a way for me to not only start studying astrology deeper and learning more about what astrology actually is versus, what pop culture teaches us, which, by the way, is just so incorrect. We'll go deeper into that in another video, but, astrology isn't just personality types. This time of deep grief and learning how to connect with my loved ones on the other side in any way that felt tangible to me. Astrology was one of those things that, because I had their birth information, I could connect to them, and I could learn about some of their own birth patterns that maybe I didn't see while they were here in this life, but I could now see with them on the other side. And it opened my eyes up to astrology and human design in a way that I had never seen it before. And astrology was something that our most ancient ancestors used to use. Although there are many historical reasons, which we're going to get into all that on this channel too, many historical reasons why it was eradicated and why it was demonized. Maybe it wasn't used with the best of intentions by people then, but it is still this system that, I was able to study and learn more about the pattern recognition of when planets are in certain constellations in the sky and how that affects earthly bodies, how how a full moon versus a new moon affects earthly bodies, our emotional landscape. Anyway, I digress. So, and also at that same time, this was also the time that I started deeply studying nervous system regulation and how trauma affects the body and what the definition of trauma even is, because every single person is going to experience trauma at some point in their lives. And trauma has become kind of a buzzword over the years. And really and this was the time when I learned that really what a trauma is when our nervous system is overwhelmed with a situation it doesn't know how to handle. And so it goes into whatever default mode feels most comfortable and safe to us in order to survive. Trauma could be something as simple as being embarrassed in front of your third grade class, or it could be something as severe as a sudden death of a loved one. You know, both things can be true. And this was the time when I started to deeply study and deeply learn more, because grief and this traumatic moment wasn't something that could be processed through talking. You can't talk your way out of grief. You can't talk your way through a traumatic moment. It literally, our bodies and our brains literally don't work that way. And this was the time that I started learning about that, not only for myself, but because I had started Move, Breathe, Heal. I totally skipped over that part. In February of 2022, I started Move, Breathe, Heal, and I started teaching online breathwork classes and offering one-on-one human design readings. And then, you know, by October, this tragedy occurred. And then right when you're starting to feel safe enough to start processing that loss, I experienced another one in May of 2023. And it was just, it wasn't something that I could avoid. It wasn't something I could escape from. I kept trying to escape into my work and kept trying to start new work projects that my nervous system just wasn't ready for. And what my nervous system could handle was studying and learning more about the topics that I was passionate about, which was nervous system regulation, emotional processing, human design, astrology. You know, learning all of these things was something that I could ground into during the darkest and hardest chapter of my life. And through that study of trauma and how it gets stored in the body, and, you know, trying to force yourself to do a big yoga practice during that time, or a really intense breath work session during that time can actually be worse for your nervous system. And I experienced this firsthand. And this was when I started learning and studying somatics and these tiny little micro movements, how sometimes less is more, how when you're in those very early stages of healing an overwhelming emotional event, how less can be more, and how gentle micro movements can actually be more effective and healing than a giant yoga class. When you're in the most tender moments of grief, how it's impossible to be around groups of people who aren't in that state that you're in. And the only way to get out of it is to learn how to process some of that in isolation. was when I started to shift away from rapid breath work into all of the different breath work patterns, all of the different somatic movements that, rapid breath work has its place, but early stages of trauma healing, or when, a really overwhelming emotional event happens, that's not it. That's not the time and place for it. And so this was really when I started to expand my studies and my knowledge on this, and started prioritizing restoration over intensity. And through this experience, I found a new way forward with Move, Breathe, Heal. And I knew then too that this wasn't just for myself, but it was for others too, because I talked to so many others who had been through deep grief, who had been through deep loss, and who were not given the correct support either. Reconnect to my body, letting others reconnect to their bodies in a way that felt gentle, in a way that felt safe, and was going to actually heal from the root. In a weird way, everything kind of came full circle. And in a weird way, life never takes you the way that you expect it to go. And continuing to follow this path and trust it, even in my darkest of times, it really all came full circle. In September of 2023, I started co-hosting these restorative goddess circles, and this was kind of my first experience teaching group breathwork. I had taught a few group breathwork classes here and there before my family passed away, but it was about 1 year after my cousin's accident that I started offering and co-hosting these restorative goddess circles for women. And looking back now, I can remember that these circles and me guiding these women through breathwork and somatics, and it's the exact vision that I saw in that first breathwork class that I took, the first breathwork class that I experienced, where I saw myself teaching a group in an outdoor space. That led me here. And the journey to get here was anything but easy. I'll never forget one of my darkest moments in deep grief. I remember sitting on my bedroom floor, and I had a duffel bag in front of me, and I was just stuck trying to muster up the energy to pack for a third family member's funeral in 7 months. And I remember just sobbing and feeling so broken and feeling so alone and betrayed by God, betrayed by the universe. And I remember looking up at my husband. My husband was holding me. I remember looking up at him through tears, and I remember saying to him, I don't know why my life feels so shitty right now, but someday I'm going to take all this shit and do something good with it. Otherwise, what's the point of living? And to a lot of you, that's going to seem really dark, but that's how I felt. It was like, what's the point of life if you can be a good person and you can do everything right, and hardship and tragedy can still hit, even if you live in the way that you think you're supposed to. And you never think it can happen to you until it does. And I remember just feeling so broken and thinking, what is the point? What's the point? But even in my darkest moments, I still had that little spark of something in me, that little spark of determination, of, I don't know what this is all about, but I'm going to take the shit and turn it into diamonds someday. And I'm going to, metaphorically speaking, I'm going to take this darkness and turn it into something good and useful someday. And that moment of me crying on the floor still lives in me, because in many ways, and so imperfectly, it's what I've done. I stumbled and fell so many times, and I will likely stumble and fall many times ahead of me. And there's one thing I have learned, it's that all of these tools that I teach and I offer today are the same ones that carried me through the darkest moments. These tools helped me find myself, and then when I lost myself, they helped me find myself again. And I used these tools during the best moments of my life, and I used these tools during the worst moments of my life. And through all of that transformation and alchemy, these have helped me find myself again. So, obviously, the tools that I offer are not the only tools I've used, right? I've used therapy, I've done EMDR as well. And while those have also been invaluable, I've learned that healing doesn't happen just in the 1 hour session in therapy week to week. It actually happens more in the quiet moments in between, in the things that you take from the therapy room and take home with you. And our therapists don't have the capacity to move us through a panic attack at 3 a.m. But knowing tools like emotional regulation that you can have at home at any time to help you move through those types of moments, or even just starting a new habit, right? It doesn't always have to be so deep. It can be something as simple as like, I want to start a new exercise habit, and we have to train our nervous system and know these emotional regulation tools in order to do so, right? And therapy is so invaluable for so many things, and I would not be here. Move, Breathe, Heal would not be here without it, and without that trauma-informed lens. When you are alone with your breath, moving through transformation, one inhale at a time outside of that therapy room, that's where the real magic happens. Healing happens when you learn to feel safe in your body again, when your nervous system understands that it's not in the past anymore and that it's here in the present. And that's exactly why I do what I do today, both from, the more woo-woo and spiritual side of things like human design and astrology, also from the more scientific and trauma-informed lens of nervous system healing and somatic work. Healing isn't about bypassing our pain. It's not about coping mechanisms. You're not destined to have, things like anxiety or depressive feelings or whatever. That's not your destiny to have that forever. Healing is about finding the tools to be able to hold all parts of you through it, through the good, through the bad, through the ugly. It's about having a whole human experience. It's about knowing that, you can experience joy and grief simultaneously. Knowing that even in your darkest moments, like even in my own darkest moments of sobbing on the floor after a 3rd consecutive loss in a row, knowing that I had those emotional regulation tools and the cognitive spiritual tools as well to be able to find my way back into the new version of myself. even if the old versions of myself had to die away, some pieces will come with you after a deep transformation, and some pieces of you will fall away and be left behind. And these tools have been so transformational for me in being able to hold my own space, hold my own vulnerability, hold my own joy, grief, sadness, vulnerability, all at the same time. So I know this was quite the first episode, quite the first get to know me. And if you're still here, I just want to thank you for holding space for my story, holding space for, me, Ashley, the person, not just Ashley, the human design teacher, not just Ashley, the astrologer, not just Ashley, the somatic practitioner and breathwork teacher, but also Ashley, me as a person. And this episode is only the beginning of what's to come on here. Alongside the deep restorative breathwork sessions that I offer online and in person, I will also be sharing a lot more educational content on here too, regarding human design, regarding astrology, and all through a trauma-informed lens, so that all of you can start learning in a more accessible way how to understand your own selves, your own energy on a deeper level. On here, we'll see what all is to come. We'll let it evolve as it is, but for now, you will definitely be seeing more of that educational content. I will also be offering somatic meditations on here so that you can get an idea of what a full deep breathwork practice with me is like. This will be the space for you to see when my upcoming online offerings are going to be. I'll be having some workshops, online classes, as well as those one-on-one sessions who do want to work deeper with me, who do want to get to know your own human design and astrology on a deeper level. I'll be offering that as well. But consider this a space for you to learn how to start integrating your own and start learning more about your own chart and how to read it for when you're ready to dive deeper into your own personal journey. Just know that wherever you are at in your path, you don't have to navigate it alone. We're creating a little Move, Breathe, Heal community here. Whether it's through my content on here, know that I'm here to support you in coming home to yourself in any stage, any walk of life that you may be in, gently, safely, and in a way that honors your intuitive process. That's the most important part, guiding you back to your own intuition. I always tell my people, I am not your healer, I am not your guru, but I am your space holder to hold your hand and love on you while you're going through your own transformative healing journey. So now that I've rambled your guys' ears off, thank you for being here. And I look forward to whatever this is turning into. And I will see you in the next video or episode. Bye.